Now, if we just take a quick look at some of the raw data that you can actually get out of the tool once you've run that Monte Carlo simulation, you can see here we've got some raw data, and we can spot some of the dominant risk influences on any given iteration of the Monte Carlo. And here I'm showing the lowest total cost impacts and a few naturally occurring random risk impacts. But now I could sort here on this column, and now I'm showing the highest total cumulative cost outcomes for the project. And we can see that there's some patterns that are beginning to emerge, some risk scenarios that are typically conspiring together, and each of these iterations you are tending to push towards the statistical P100, or in layman's terms, the worst actual case position. And that in turn opens up new avenues of debate with your senior team. You know, if they want to sleep better at night, how do you decouple those free events like X, Y, and Z? Is there a way of doing it? And if there is it even cost effective to do so, or are we just worrying about absolute worst case doomsday scenario stuff? But in any case, these are the kinds of tools that allow you to behave and act a bit like a detective, and you can try and figure out how events may transpire, and you can take that further to try and do something about it, you know, so you're preventing it from happening on your real life actual project. Now what you can do here is you can actually click on the iteration, and it's actually a hyperlink, and it will take you back to a read-only view of the project frozen on that iteration. So here's one of those risk-adjusted Gantt charts that we had to look at earlier. So you've got some bars there, some grey ones, they're anchored in place. They represent the original deterministic schedule position. Then there's some salmon pink P80 confidence, so that's the where these bars might typically end up being positioned after they've been stressed by the risks and the uncertainties. And you can also actually see which are the risks that impacted on that particular scenario. So they're drawn in as well. So there's some yellow triangles giving you indication of how much impact there was on any given iteration, and they're labeled as well, so you can see which risks they were that were contributing to that. Now this on screen at the moment might be a pretty fortunate scenario, okay? Things haven't moved too far from the original deterministic, but you could compare that with a different iteration where it wasn't so good. It was a bit of a bad day in the office, actually, consecutively every single day. The whole project was a nightmare. So you can see just how much more movement there is in that position, and it goes far in excess of that P80. That is like the P100, the worst case out of all 2,000 iterations that we simulated. So you can use this as an extra tool in your tool belt to help you understand how your model is behaving. Is it behaving as expected? Or maybe there's some anomalies. Maybe you'll discover something unexpected. Some scenarios may be positive, maybe negative. All part of the validation step, really. Now, the main ingredient for generating insight, which is when you suddenly learn something new and unexpected, is to feed your curiosity. And traditionally, that was quite difficult to do, as the models themselves took a long time to build, and rerunning them to hunt for clues, valuable gems, pretty time consuming. And there was that time pressure that we mentioned earlier. But with Safran Risk, it's easier than ever to create custom scenarios and just test some theories very quickly and on the fly. And the fast creation of hybrid scenarios, so not just all the risks on your register being entirely at pre-mitigated versus entirely at post-mitigated positions. But Safran enables you to blend these together. So you can either do so manually via the radio buttons you can see in the red hoop there, or there's a way of doing it probabilistically in the same simulation. So sometimes the same thing will be pre and sometimes it will be post, okay? And doing this can open up way more insights into the effectiveness of mitigation or cost benefit analysis of an opportunity, and just give you a more realistic output, frankly. So there's lots of things here that you can do that's just not easy to do elsewhere in other tools that I've used, or they're just impossible to do. Now, I see little reason why people wouldn't want to conduct what I call soft what-if scenarios, which is where you're making these little easy tweaks and alterations to the model, the simulation settings, but like whether or not to include the correlations that is highlighted there. As you get more comfortable with running these fast little experiments, you'll quickly discover how versatile Safran Risk's database approach to distribution comparison can be in allowing you to create multiple reports, fill each with as many SCurves as you like, for any reason that you like, from any source that you like, including project-to-project comparison. It doesn't have to be the same project. And this feature will cover your typical requirement for showing a pre-mitigated curve versus a post-mitigated curve, for doing that high-level cost-benefit analysis, as it's shown on the screen there. But it also has the added advantage that it can be switched into a trending mode to help provide narrative for longer duration projects that are experiencing change in their exposure, maybe increased volatility due to change management, scope creep, or as they successfully implement their mitigation measures and you see their exposure levels begin to reduce over time. Or you could do it preemptively like this and show it as a bit of a waterfall sort of expectation. And of course, you can deploy this same tool for what I then describe as being a hard what-if scenario, where you investigate changes to the fundamental scope or the methodology, the approach of that project. And you can see on screen that I've got some parallel lines sort of drawn in, and I've manually increased the scope, ratcheted it up incrementally. But then I've run an additional model where the scope was actually an uncertain variable. And you can see that that's the gray curve, the kind of S-curve. It intersects and dissects across the parallel curves, indicating which scenario you might want to resource and plan up towards. So third curve from the left, perhaps, at the P80 confidence. But it's no use having endless insights if you're not then able to communicate them effectively. And by this, I mean making a contextual recommendation, multiple possible courses of action or inaction, convert those insights into decisions that have meaningful ramifications. So as I've said before, there's so much extra value that a sound risk analysis could be adding in terms of decision support and not just following a linear process for the sake of a pre-mandated confidence output or a list of top risks that is simply mirroring back to the team what they already suspected. So a great way of enhancing your communication is to convert schedule impacts into relative cost increases and decreases. Now, to do this, you'll need to fully integrate your cost and schedule risk models together. And Safran accepts the traditional cost and resource loaded schedule approach. However, we've also provided a simpler alternative method that uses the cost breakdown structure, CBS, that your cost estimators, your quantity surveyors, are going to be far more familiar with. So let's look at a quick example from a fictional project where we're going to be manufacturing 10,000 drones. First, we're going to design the product and procure the necessary materials, then fabricate and assemble the product, which will then test fly on a disused airfield before finally delivering the product to our customer. So we're going to want to focus on just this testing phase, which will have various risks such as bad weather that may cause prolongation with the associated rental fees for the airfield. So we expect some costs to maybe go up in those scenarios. So we're looking at the cost breakdown structure screen now. And what you can see here, if I just highlight it, this one line item in particular. So this is the hiring of that test site. And we're just going to make it a single lump sum base price of $590,000. But what we've then done is we've linked it to the hammock of the testing phase. And then we said that 20% of the cost is actually going to be fixed and it's time independent. It's not going to change at all in the simulation. However, this remaining 80% is under the variable column. And it's variable because these are the bits, this is the cost we're going to allow to become time dependent. So as longer, higher periods transpire due to the risks and uncertainties impacting, this will translate into additional prolongation cost, or it may even cost less if time-saving opportunities are instead realized. So what the system is automatically doing for us is taking that variable portion, dividing it by the 107 days, and then giving us a day rate, or you might call it a burn rate, of $4,411 per day. So for every day beyond the deterministic duration, it will cost this much more, and for every day saved, it'll save this much money. And because we can, because we've actually mapped this cost to specific activities, we can actually see this cost is going to be incurred here within our deterministic cash flow profile, which you can then start to see moving around with each iteration of the step through, or we can use our probabilistic cash flow report to see the cumulative exposure of a risk-adjusted cash flow. So this integration of our cost and schedule risk models then allows us to ask very specific and targeted questions with regards to opportunity proposals and mitigation effectiveness. So each scenario saved into the distribution comparison can compare different possible choices to the combined cost and/or time savings on offer. Conversely, what sounded like a good idea might actually make the risk profile worse. So subsequently, you might not want to recommend those, but you need to do this modeling to test the theory. So in our example where we were hiring the airfield, the table on the left-hand side is now summarizing the net benefit as 410,000 combined with both those mitigations at the same time. Or it would just be 130,000 if we only chose to deploy the cheapest of the two measures. So by being specific and relevant to a narrower context, it becomes easier to make case-by-case justifications and weave together a compelling and comprehensive narrative.